Imagine this, Elena Mendez, a hard-working woman who has faced countless challenges and sacrificed so much to build a future for herself and her son, Lucas. But when the past comes knocking, revealing a secret that could change everything, Elena faces a difficult choice: fight for the truth or let time bury the pain. In this video, we dive into the shocking revelation of a secret relationship and a life-altering pregnancy. It's the emotional journey of a mother who, out of love for her son, decides to stand up against one of the most powerful men in her life. A man who wasn't just her employer, he was the father who walked away. Elena Mendez had always been a diligent worker. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, she had learned the value of hard work from a young age. It was this ethic that led her to a job at the prestigious Collins Mansion in Santa Monica, owned by Richard Collins, a man known for his wealth, influence, and often his ruthlessness. Richard was not just any businessman. He was someone who could make or break careers with a single phone call. For Elena, working in his mansion was an opportunity to support her aging parents and herself, though she could never have imagined where it would eventually lead. Elena's initial impression of Richard was that of a man who kept his distance from his staff, his aura one of authority mixed with an air of mystery. But as time went by, she began to notice small signs that hinted at a different side of him. He would occasionally engage in small talk with her, asking about her family or comment on how diligently she worked. There were moments when Richard's gaze lingered a little longer than it should, and soon, those small talks turned into private conversations in the mansion's secluded garden. Richard, who was a master at compartmentalizing his life, started to let Elena into a part of his world that few people ever saw. He spoke of the pressures of running a business empire, the loneliness of having few people to trust, and even shared moments of vulnerability. For Elena, it was both flattering and confusing. She never intended to blur the lines between employee and employer. But emotions are not always rational. Richard seemed to genuinely appreciate her presence, and before long, what began as casual conversations grew into something far more personal. The turning point came on a quiet evening. Elena was the last of the household staff still on duty, and Richard found her in the library, tidying up. They exchanged a few words, and as she turned to leave, he gently took her hand. The touch was electric, and in that moment, the boundaries that had kept them apart crumbled. One kiss led to another, and soon they were entangled in a secret affair that had both excitement and danger written all over it. For months, Elena lived in a world of quiet whispers and stolen moments, where her hopes were tied to the belief that their relationship might grow into something lasting. It was a fantasy, perhaps, but a fantasy that felt so real to her. When she found out that she was pregnant, Elena's heart leapt. She imagined Richard reacting with joy, embracing the possibility of building a future together, even if it meant defying societal norms. Yet, the reality was nothing short of a nightmare. When Elena shared the news with Richard, his reaction was not at all what she had hoped for. His expression turned cold, his voice hardened, and he accused her of trying to trap him. Richard made it clear that a child had no place in his carefully controlled life, especially not one conceived in secret. He offered her a substantial sum of money to take care of it, or to leave and never look back. There was no room for discussion, no hint of empathy in his words, only a transactional approach to a life-changing moment. Devastated by his rejection, Elena left the mansion that day with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. She refused Richard's offer of money, unwilling to sell her dignity or compromise the life growing inside her. It was the beginning of a long and arduous road. She moved into a modest apartment far away from the affluent streets of Santa Monica and took up a job at a local diner. The life she had known was gone, and in its place was a reality where survival became the priority. Yet, she found solace in the thought of the child she would soon bring into the world, vowing to love and protect her baby no matter the circumstances. As the months passed, Elena adjusted to her new life, but it was not without struggle. There were days when the exhaustion from working long shifts seemed unbearable, and times when her meager earnings barely covered her rent and medical expenses. However, she found a deeper sense of purpose every time she felt her baby move. She was determined to give her child the love and care she never received from Richard, even if it meant doing so alone. When her son, Lucas, was born, Elena experienced a love like no other. Holding him in her arms for the first time, she knew that her sacrifices were worth it. Lucas was the reason she continued to fight, and his smile gave her strength to face even the darkest of days. She watched him grow, teaching him the values of perseverance, kindness, and honesty, values she herself lived by. Despite the hardships, she made sure that Lucas felt loved and safe. And as he grew older, he began to notice the absence of a father figure in his life. Elena never spoke ill of Richard, but she also refrained from painting a rosy picture. Instead, she focused on the love they shared as mother and son, choosing to shield him from the harsh truth of their past. However, secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when they involve matters of the heart. As Lucas approached his 12th birthday, he began to ask more pointed questions about his father. Why was he not around? Did he know about him? Elena's answers were always carefully worded, but Lucas sensed there was more to the story. He grew increasingly curious, and it was this curiosity that eventually led him to discover the truth about Richard's identity. What began as an innocent search through some old boxes turned into a revelation that would change the course of their lives forever. At the end of this chapter, the stage is set for a confrontation that will bring the past roaring back into Elena's present. Lucas's discovery forces Elena to revisit the wounds she thought had long healed. And soon, the two will embark on a quest for justice that will challenge everything they know about love, integrity, and forgiveness. Stay tuned as we move into the next chapter, where Elena and Lucas make the courageous decision to take on a legal battle against Richard Collins, a battle that will reveal dark secrets and test their resolve like never before. Don't miss out on the unfolding drama. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next episode. Remember to share your thoughts below. I believe in standing up for what is right. Let's keep the conversation going. When Elena walked away from the Collins mansion, she left behind more than just a job. She left behind the illusion of a future with Richard and the stability of a secure livelihood. Now she found herself in a modest neighborhood, far removed from the grandeur of Santa Monica. Her new reality was starkly different. A small one-bedroom apartment, the lingering smell of dampness in the hallway, and a view of a bustling street lined with old shops and struggling businesses. Yet, despite the contrast, Elena felt a sense of relief. Here, she could start fresh, away from the prying eyes of the Collins household, away from the shame that threatened to consume her after Richard's cruel dismissal. Elena had always been resourceful, a trait that helped her adjust to this new chapter of her life. She quickly found work at a local diner, a humble establishment that attracted a steady flow of customers. The pay was meager, but Elena took on extra shifts whenever she could, eager to save every penny for her unborn child. She became known among the staff and regulars as the hard-working waitress with the quiet smile and kind eyes, always willing to lend an ear or help out when someone needed a favor. However, the physical demands of the job, combined with the stress of her situation, took a toll on her. There were times when her back ached so badly from long hours on her feet that she could hardly make it home without stopping to catch her breath. Yet, with every struggle, Elena's resolve grew stronger. Each night, as she lay down on the old creaky bed, she would place a hand on her belly and whisper words of love and encouragement to her baby. The thought of becoming a mother filled her with a determination she had never known before. This child, she vowed, would never feel unloved or unwanted. The months passed, and when Lucas was born, Elena's life found new meaning. She fell instantly in love with the little boy who looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. From the first moment, Lucas became her world. Even though there was no luxury or wealth surrounding them, their small apartment was filled with warmth. Elena decorated Lucas's nursery corner with bright-colored drawings and small stuffed animals she found at thrift stores. Making the most of what little she had, she took pride in every sacrifice she made, seeing them as investments in Lucas's future. Elena quickly settled into the rhythm of motherhood, juggling her work at the diner and caring for Lucas. The early years were particularly challenging. Without a family support system or a reliable childcare option, Elena often relied on the kindness of neighbors. Mrs. Jackson, the elderly woman who lived next door, was particularly fond of Lucas and would watch him during Elena's shifts. "You're a good mother," she would often tell Elena, "and that boy is lucky to have you." Hearing those words always brought Elena comfort, especially on the hard days when she doubted herself. The financial strain, however, was a constant pressure. There were months when Elena barely made enough to cover rent and bills, let alone buy anything extra. She learned how to stretch her earnings, getting creative with meal planning and budgeting. She would often skip meals herself to make sure Lucas had enough to eat, and she shopped at secondhand stores for his clothes. As Lucas grew older, he started to notice these small sacrifices. "Why don't you eat, Mama?" he would ask, concern etched on his little face. Elena would smile and reassure him, "I'm not hungry, sweetheart. You eat up." Despite their hardships, Elena was determined to give Lucas a life filled with love and values. She taught him about kindness, the importance of helping others, and to always do his best, regardless of the circumstances. She made it a point to volunteer at the local community center, where they would help distribute food to families in need. "Remember, Lucas," she would say, "we always share what we have, no matter how little." Lucas grew up surrounded by love, but as he got older, questions about his father became more frequent. He noticed that unlike his friends at school, he didn't have a dad who came to pick him up or play ball in the park. Elena tried to fill the gap as best she could, cheering him on at school events and playing catch in the backyard. But even her best efforts couldn't erase the void left by Richard's absence. "Where's my dad, Mama?" Lucas would ask, his young face full of curiosity. Elena's answers were always vague, carefully crafted to shield him from the truth. "He's just not around, sweetheart. It's complicated." The weight of her secret was becoming heavier with each passing year. When Lucas turned 12, everything changed. While rummaging through some old boxes in the closet, looking for some forgotten toy, he found a photograph, a picture of Elena in the garden of the Collins mansion, taken during the time she worked there. In the background, Richard could be seen, his arm casually draped over the back of a chair. It was the first time Lucas had ever seen his father's face. When he confronted Elena about the man in the picture, she could see the pieces falling into place in his mind. There was no point in hiding the truth any longer. She sat him down and told him about Richard, how they met, the relationship they shared, and how he turned his back on them when she became pregnant. The hurt in Lucas's eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't just angry at Richard. He felt a deep sense of betrayal towards his mother for keeping the truth from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, tears streaming down his cheeks. Elena's heart broke as she explained, "I didn't want you to feel unwanted or unloved. I thought that if I could give you enough love, you wouldn't need to know." But she realized then that she had underestimated Lucas's need for answers, for a sense of identity. From that moment, everything changed. The question was no longer about whether they should confront Richard, but rather how they would do it. It was Lucas who first brought up the idea of seeking justice. "He can't just get away with what he did," he insisted. At first, Elena hesitated. Taking on a man like Richard Collins, with his resources and influence, seemed like a daunting task. However, she soon realized that this was not just about money or recognition. It was about standing up for herself and for Lucas, about sending a message that actions have consequences, and that even the wealthy and powerful cannot escape accountability. After careful consideration, Elena reached out to Samantha Thompson, a renowned attorney known for her work in high-profile cases involving workers' rights and family law. Samantha listened intently as Elena recounted her story, nodding in understanding at the injustices she faced. "We'll make sure he is held accountable," Samantha promised, her tone resolute. With a clear legal strategy in mind, they prepared to file a lawsuit against Richard, seeking recognition of paternity, child support, and damages for the wrongful dismissal. As the first hearing approached, Elena felt a mixture of apprehension and determination. It was as if every emotion she had buried over the years was finally surfacing, demanding to be heard. She was not just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for her son's future, for his right to be acknowledged and supported by the man who abandoned them. And while the road ahead was sure to be filled with challenges, Elena knew that she and Lucas were stronger together than they had ever been alone. In the next chapter, the legal battle heats up as Elena and Lucas confront Richard in court. Witness testimonies and shocking evidence will come to light, exposing hidden truths that will change everything. Don't miss the next part. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated. Share your thoughts below. Justice is worth fighting for. Let's continue this powerful journey together. The decision to pursue legal action against Richard Collins marked a pivotal moment in Elena and Lucas's lives. It was not just a battle for financial support or recognition, but a fight for dignity and justice. The years of hardship, the sacrifices Elena had made, and the questions that had haunted Lucas would finally be addressed in a courtroom. As they stepped into the legal process, they knew that what lay ahead would be an uphill struggle. Richard was a man of considerable means, and his influence could easily sway public opinion. Yet, Elena was driven by a newfound resolve, fueled by the desire to secure a better future for her son and to right the wrongs of the past. Elena and Lucas's first meeting with Samantha Thompson, their attorney, set the tone for what was to come. Samantha had a reputation for taking on difficult cases, particularly those involving corporate misconduct and family disputes. Her approach was straightforward and tenacious, qualities that immediately put Elena at ease. As they sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and case files, Samantha listened carefully to Elena's account of her relationship with Richard and the events that followed. "There's no question that what you've endured is unjust," Samantha said, leaning forward with a determined look in her eyes. "We'll be seeking recognition of paternity, retroactive child support, and damages for emotional distress and wrongful termination. It won't be easy, but with the right evidence, we can build a strong case." Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as the legal strategy was laid out. For the first time, someone was validating her struggle, recognizing the injustice she had faced. Lucas, sitting next to her, listened intently, absorbing every detail. He was no longer the confused child who stumbled upon a photograph in an old box. He was now a young boy with a mission, seeking answers and demanding accountability from the man who had abandoned him. The lawsuit was filed shortly thereafter, and Richard Collins was officially served with court papers. Predictably, his response was one of indignation. Richard's attorneys quickly moved to have the case dismissed, citing lack of evidence and questioning the timing of the lawsuit. They argued that Elena was merely seeking a financial windfall after years of remaining silent. Richard himself issued a brief public statement, claiming he had no knowledge of any child resulting from a past relationship and implying that the entire case was baseless. Despite Richard's attempt to discredit them, Samantha assured Elena that this kind of reaction was common in cases involving powerful defendants. "He's trying to make us back down," she said, "but we're not going to let that happen. The key will be to provide compelling evidence and credible testimonies to support your claims." As the case moved forward, the discovery phase began, during which both sides would gather evidence to support their arguments. Samantha and her legal team set to work tracking down witnesses who could corroborate Elena's story. Among them were former employees of the Collins mansion who had witnessed the discreet relationship between Elena and Richard. Some were reluctant to come forward, fearing repercussions, but a few agreed to testify, citing their conscience and the belief that Elena deserved justice. One particularly important witness was Carla, a housekeeper who had worked alongside Elena during her time at the mansion. Carla recalled several occasions when she had seen Richard and Elena together in private settings, and she spoke of the subtle but undeniable connection they shared. "You could tell they were more than just employer and employee," Carla testified in a deposition. "There was a familiarity between them that went beyond the professional." In addition to witness testimonies, Samantha sought to uncover written correspondence or other records that might support the case. After weeks of investigation, the legal team managed to obtain a series of text messages Richard had sent to Elena during the early stages of her pregnancy. In these messages, Richard's dismissive attitude and attempts to pressure Elena into leaving town were evident. One message read, "This situation cannot continue. You need to make this go away, or I will." These texts added a crucial layer to the case, demonstrating Richard's knowledge of the pregnancy and his efforts to avoid responsibility. With this new evidence in hand, the case took on a different tone. The judge denied Richard's motion to dismiss, allowing the lawsuit to proceed to trial. The courtroom was now set for what would become a high-profile legal battle, drawing public attention and media coverage. Journalists and news outlets picked up the story, portraying it as a classic David versus Goliath scenario, a single mother and her young son taking on a wealthy and powerful businessman. Public opinion began to shift, with many sympathizing with Elena and Lucas's plight. The day of the trial's opening arguments arrived, and as Elena took her seat in the courtroom, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. She had prepared herself for this moment, but the reality of sitting across from Richard, separated only by the distance of the courtroom floor, brought back painful memories. She glanced over at Lucas, who sat beside her, his expression calm but focused. He was her anchor, her reason for enduring this ordeal. Samantha delivered the opening statement with poise and conviction. She spoke of the challenges Elena faced as a single mother, the sacrifices she made, and the emotional toll of Richard's abandonment. She laid out the evidence that would be presented, including the testimonies from former mansion staff and the incriminating text messages. "This case is about more than just financial support," Samantha argued. "It's about acknowledging the rights of a child and the responsibilities of a father." Richard's attorney, however, was quick to paint a different picture. He portrayed Elena as an opportunist, suggesting that her motives were purely financial and that there was no substantive proof of Richard's involvement with her. The attorney emphasized that Richard had consistently denied any knowledge of a child, framing the lawsuit as a desperate attempt to tarnish his reputation. As the trial unfolded, witnesses took the stand one by one. Some spoke in Elena's defense, while others were called by Richard's legal team to discredit her. There were moments of doubt, times when it seemed the opposing counsel's strategy of character assassination might sway the outcome. But then, the turning point came. A former business associate of Richard's, someone who had been close to him during the time of Elena's employment, took the stand. This individual, who chose to remain anonymous initially, testified that Richard had indeed confided in him about the pregnancy. "He told me he didn't want to be tied down and that he would deal with it," the witness recalled. This testimony corroborated Elena's claims and cast serious doubt on Richard's credibility. The final blow came when Samantha introduced the text messages as evidence. Richard's attorney tried to argue that the messages were taken out of context, but the damaging implications were clear. The words spoke for themselves, revealing a man who was not only aware of the situation, but was actively trying to distance himself from it. As the trial drew to a close, Elena took the stand to deliver her testimony. She spoke candidly about her relationship with Richard, the moment he rejected her and their child, and the years of struggle she endured afterward. Her voice trembled as she described the pain of raising Lucas alone, yet it was steady with resolve. "I'm not here to destroy anyone's life," she said, glancing at Richard, who avoided her gaze. "I'm here to fight for my son, to give him what he deserves, a father who acknowledges him." Lucas, too, gave a brief statement. Standing before the court, he spoke not as a child seeking revenge, but as a young boy who wanted answers. "I just want to know why my dad wasn't there for me," he said quietly. "And I want him to understand what that did to us." The judge's decision is about to be revealed in the next chapter, where justice will either be served or denied. The verdict will have far-reaching consequences, not just for Elena and Lucas, but for Richard's entire legacy. Will the court rule in their favor, or will power and influence win out? Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe for updates on this emotional journey. Share your thoughts in the comments with Truth Always Finds a Way. Let's continue this powerful story together. The courtroom was a hive of tension as the trial reached its most crucial phase. the presentation of witness, testimonies, and evidence. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, as each side prepared to reveal information that could shift the balance of the case. It was no longer just about legal arguments or courtroom tactics. This was the moment where real lives and buried truths would be laid bare for the world to see. Elena and Lucas sat together, a unified front in the face of adversity, their hands clasped tightly as Samantha Townsend took the floor. Samantha's strategy was clear: bring forward a series of witnesses who could not only confirm Elena's account, but also shed light on Richard's character and his actions. The first few witnesses were former employees of the Collins mansion, each of whom spoke to the close relationship between Elena and Richard. These testimonies helped to establish the context of their relationship, contradicting Richard's attempts to portray Elena as merely another employee. One housekeeper recalled the private conversation she had overheard, snippets that hinted at a relationship that was far from professional. Another staff member remembered Richard asking Elena to stay late or to accompany him on errands outside the mansion, requests that were not made of other employees. These small but significant details helped to paint a picture of a man who was not as detached from Elena as his defense team claimed. As more witnesses took the stand, the trial took an unexpected turn. A former friend of Richard, who had distanced himself from the businessman years ago, agreed to testify. This individual, whom we will call James to protect his identity, had known Richard for over a decade and was well acquainted with his lifestyle. James revealed that Richard had spoken to him about Elena in a moment of frustration, admitting that he knew about the pregnancy but had no intention of letting it derail his life. I remember him saying, "I'm not going to be a father at this stage in my life. I've worked too hard to let something like this change everything," James recalled. His testimony was a bombshell, directly contradicting Richard's claim that he had no knowledge of Lucas's existence. James's words echoed through the courtroom, shifting the mood as murmurs spread among the observers. But it was not just testimonies that would weigh in the case. Physical evidence also played a critical role. Samantha had worked tirelessly to gather as much documentation as possible to support Elena's claims. The text messages Richard had sent to Elena were already a significant piece of evidence, revealing his attempts to dismiss and intimidate her. But there was more to be uncovered. Samantha presented a series of financial documents that revealed Richard's discreet attempts to settle the matter out of court. These included bank transfers to an intermediary who had approached Elena shortly after she left the mansion, offering a settlement in exchange for her silence. Elena had rejected the offer, refusing to be paid off to keep quiet about Lucas's existence. The document suggested that Richard had indeed taken steps to prevent any public acknowledgement of the child, adding further weight to the argument that he was aware of Lucas from the beginning. As these revelations unfolded, Richard's defense team found themselves on increasingly shaky ground. They attempted to discredit the witnesses, pointing to inconsistencies in their testimonies or questioning their motives. The defense's strategy was to paint Elena and her supporters as individuals with personal grievances against Richard, implying that their stories were shaped by resentment rather than truth. Yet, despite their efforts, the evidence spoke louder than the arguments presented. There was one more twist that no one had anticipated. During the trial, Samantha uncovered a piece of crucial information that had been hidden from public view: non-disclosure agreements signed by another woman, a former employee at one of Richard's companies. This woman had filed a complaint against Richard years ago, citing similar patterns of manipulation and coercion. Though her case was unrelated to Elena's, the existence of such an agreement painted a picture of a man who was willing to go to great lengths to protect his image and silence those who might challenge him. Samantha petitioned the court to allow this evidence to be admitted, arguing that it showed a pattern of behavior that was relevant to Elena's case. After much deliberation, the judge permitted the agreement to be presented, which significantly damaged Richard's credibility. It demonstrated that Elena was not the first person he had tried to intimidate or silence, and that his denials regarding Lucas might indeed be part of a larger pattern. With each new revelation, the courtroom atmosphere grew more charged. Richard, who had initially presented himself as a confident and composed figure, began to appear more unsettled. His attempts to avoid eye contact with Elena and Lucas did not go unnoticed by the jury, and his occasional outbursts at his attorneys hinted at a man who was losing control over the situation. As the trial neared its conclusion, Samantha called Elena to the stand once more. This time, Elena spoke not only of her relationship with Richard and the events surrounding her dismissal, but of the emotional toll it had taken on her and Lucas over the years. She described the moments of doubt, the feelings of worthlessness that had plagued her when Richard turned his back on them, and the many times she had to reassure her son that they were enough, just the two of them. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes as she recounted the struggles of raising a child alone, often working 2 jobs to make ends meet while trying to provide a loving home for Lucas. "I did my best," she said, her voice breaking. "I gave him everything I had, and I never wanted him to feel like he was missing out on anything. But every time he asked about his father, I saw the pain in his eyes." Lucas, who had listened quietly to the proceedings thus far, was now invited to speak. The courtroom fell silent as he took the stand. Despite his young age, Lucas spoke with a maturity that moved many to tears. He talked about the longing he had felt for a father, the questions that had gone unanswered, and the sadness that came from knowing his father didn't want to be part of his life. "But I also want to thank my mom," Lucas added, looking over at Elena, "for always being there for me. She never gave up, even when things were hard. And now, I just want the truth to be known. That's all I want." As Lucas stepped down, the gravity of his words hung in the air, making it clear that this case was about more than just legal outcomes. It was about seeking the truth and healing the wounds of the past. The judge's expression softened as he addressed the court, acknowledging the emotional impact of the testimonies. The closing arguments were brief, yet powerful. Samantha reminded the court that this case was not only about holding Richard accountable, but about giving Lucas the acknowledgement he deserved. She urged the jury to consider the evidence, the testimonies, and the undeniable pain that had been caused by Richard's actions. Richard's attorney made one last attempt to sway the jury, reiterating the claim that Elena was motivated by financial gain. Yet, even he seemed to struggle in light of the overwhelming evidence that had been presented. Next, we'll reveal the judge's verdict and the consequences that follow, affecting not just Richard's wealth and reputation, but the very core of his character. What will be the fate of this powerful man who tried to bury his mistakes? Will justice be served, or will the scales tip in favor of privilege and power? Don't miss the next chapter, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for the latest updates on this heart-wrenching story. Share your thoughts below. Truth is the foundation of justice. Stay with us as we unravel the final judgment. The courtroom was hushed with anticipation as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of testimonies, shocking revelations, and emotional moments that had kept everyone on the edge of their seats. Now it all came down to this, the culmination of Elena and Lucas's fight for justice against Richard Collins, a man who had used his power and influence to try and dismiss their existence. For Elena, the outcome would not only determine their financial future, but also validate the years of struggle and sacrifice she had endured. The judge, a seasoned man with a calm demeanor, began by summarizing the case, carefully recapping the key points raised during the trial. He acknowledged the challenging nature of the case, especially given the high-profile status of the defendant. This court has heard the accounts of witnesses, reviewed the evidence presented, and taken into consideration the emotional and psychological toll this situation has had on the parties involved. He began, his voice measured and deliberate. As he continued, the tension in the room became palpable. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she held onto Lucas's hand, seeking strength in the bond they shared. Richard sat stoically on the opposite side, his expression a mixture of anxiety and defiance. For a man accustomed to controlling his surroundings and dictating outcomes, the prospect of losing this case, and the control it symbolized, was a bitter pill to swallow. The judge turned his attention to the claims of wrongful termination and paternity. He addressed the evidence brought forward by Samantha and her legal team, including the testimonies of former staff members who witnessed the relationship between Elena and Richard, the incriminating text messages, and the financial documents showing Richard's attempts to silence Elena. It is clear that there was more than sufficient knowledge on the part of Mr. Collins regarding the plaintiff's pregnancy, the judge declared. The evidence supports the claim that Mr. Collins took deliberate steps to avoid any form of responsibility. He continued to outline the implications of Richard's actions, particularly the impact on Lucas, who had been deprived of the support and acknowledgement of his father for over a decade. The judge's tone grew stern as he spoke of the moral and legal obligations of parenthood, emphasizing that no one, regardless of their social or financial status, is exempt from the responsibilities that come with bringing a child into the world. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Elena Mendez, the judge announced, his words echoing throughout the courtroom. Mr. Collins is hereby ordered to pay retroactive child support, including interest for the entire duration of Lucas's life. Additionally, the court awards damages for emotional distress, recognizing the pain and suffering caused by Mr. Collins's actions. There was an audible gasp from the courtroom audience, followed by murmurs of approval. Elena felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, and a profound sense of vindication. Tears welled up in her eyes as she glanced at Lucas, who returned her gaze with a triumphant smile. For so long, they had been the underdogs, the ones who had to fight for every inch of progress, and now they had finally won a measure of justice. But the judge was not finished. He turned to Richard, who was visibly shaken by the outcome. The verdict was not just a legal blow, it was a public condemnation of his character. Mr. Collins, your actions have demonstrated a clear disregard for the well-being of your child and a pattern of behavior aimed at avoiding accountability. The judge continued. As a result, you are also required to establish a trust fund for Lucas's future educational expenses. This court expects you to take your responsibilities seriously moving forward, for this is not merely about monetary compensation, but about the moral duty you owe to your son. Richard's expression hardened, his jaw clenching as he processed the reality of his situation. He had spent years cultivating an image of success and power, only to have it come crashing down in a matter of weeks. The public nature of the trial had not only damaged his reputation, but had also exposed his personal failings for all to see. The financial penalties were substantial, but the blow to his ego was perhaps the most significant consequence. After the judge dismissed the court, Samantha turned to Elena and Lucas, her face beaming with pride. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You both showed incredible strength and resilience through all of this." Elena embraced Samantha, expressing her gratitude for the attorney's dedication and hard work. As they stepped outside the courthouse, they were greeted by a throng of reporters and cameras, eager to capture the reactions to the verdict. Elena hesitated for a moment, uncertain about facing the public after such a personal ordeal. But then, she felt Lucas squeeze her hand reassuringly, and she knew that this was a part of their journey to a moment to be seen and heard. "Justice has been served today," Elena said, addressing the crowd with a calm yet powerful voice. "This wasn't just about money. It was about standing up for my son, about making sure he knows that he deserves to be recognized and valued. I hope this case serves as a reminder that no matter who you are or how much power you think you have, you are not above the law." Richard's attempt to avoid the media was unsuccessful. As reporters pursued him with questions about his plans to comply with the court's orders and whether he regretted his actions, he offered no response, pushing his way past the crowd with his lawyers in tow. It was a stark contrast to the confident public figure he had always presented, and the image of him retreating under the weight of his own scandal was sure to become a lasting memory for those who followed the case. In the days that followed, the media coverage continued, highlighting the details of the trial and its impact on Richard's business ventures. Investors began to distance themselves from his companies, and several board members resigned in light of the negative publicity. The financial cost of the lawsuit, combined with the reputational damage, forced Richard to sell off some of his assets to meet the court's requirements. For a man who had built an empire, The fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. Meanwhile, Elena and Lucas were beginning to adjust to their new reality. The settlement not only provided financial security, but also opened new opportunities for them. Elena decided to pursue a long-held dream of opening a cafe, a cozy place she named Haven of Hope, which quickly became a local favorite. The cafe symbolized more than just a fresh start. It was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even after the darkest moments, new beginnings are possible. For Lucas, the journey was far from over. The court's decision marked the start of a new chapter, but it also came with the challenge of understanding his relationship with his father. Richard reached out to him, expressing a desire to meet and begin to make amends. It was a complicated decision, and Elena made it clear that it was entirely up to Lucas. After much thought, Lucas agreed to meet with Richard, not out of a need for validation, but to find closure and to see if there was any room for healing. Their first meeting was awkward and filled with unspoken emotions, but it was also a step towards reconciliation. Richard expressed genuine remorse, admitting to his mistakes and the damage they had caused. While the path to rebuilding their relationship would be long and uncertain, there was at least a glimmer of hope that they could move forward, one step at a time. In the next chapter, we'll explore the aftermath of the trial in greater depth. As Richard grapples with his downfall, we'll see how Elena and Lucas use their newfound stability to embrace new opportunities and pursue long-held dreams. Will Richard be able to earn a place in Lucas's life? Or will the past be too difficult to overcome? Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the next part of this heartfelt story. Comment below. Healing takes courage and time. Let's continue this journey of growth and redemption together. The verdict had been delivered, and the consequences of Richard Collins's actions were unfolding in ways he could never have anticipated. His once prestigious reputation, built on years of business acumen and strategic partnerships, was rapidly crumbling under the weight of public outrage and financial setbacks. The case had not just been a legal battle, it had become a story that resonated deeply with many, shining a light on the disparity between the powerful and the powerless, and the consequences of neglecting one's responsibilities. The initial wave of media coverage focused on the courtroom drama, the emotional testimonies, and the final verdict that favored Elena and Lucas. However, as days turned into weeks, the narrative shifted to Richard's personal and professional downfall. Major news outlets ran stories detailing his attempt to deny paternity and the lengths he went to avoid taking responsibility for his son. The text messages, witness testimonies, and evidence presented during the trial painted a picture of a man who had prioritized his career and public image over his moral obligations. For Richard, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. His business empire, which had been a symbol of success and influence, began to show signs of fracture. The companies under his control saw a sharp decline in stock value as investors pulled out, wary of the negative publicity. Several high-profile partners severed ties with him, citing concerns over the ethical implications of being associated with his brand. Richard's presence on company boards became a liability rather than an asset, leading to his resignation from several key positions. Moreover, the public backlash was relentless. Social media buzzed with discussions about the trial, with many calling for boycotts of his businesses. Online reviews of his companies became flooded with negative comments, urging customers to avoid supporting a man who had been so willing to neglect his own child. The sentiment was clear. Richard's actions had not just been a personal failure, but a public betrayal of trust. For a man who had built his identity around his accomplishments, the erosion of his reputation was a blow from which he could not easily recover. Amidst the turmoil, Richard faced another challenge: his own family. The scandal had taken a toll on his personal relationships, straining the already fragile connections with relatives who had distanced themselves over the years due to his workaholic tendencies. Now, with the public humiliation of the trial, they were forced to confront the man behind the mask of success. Several family members openly expressed their disappointment, citing his treatment of Elena and Lucas as a moral failure. The damage was not limited to his business. It permeated every aspect of his life, revealing the hollow foundation upon which he had built his world. In the months following the trial, Richard's financial situation deteriorated further. The court-mandated payments, including retroactive child support and damages, along with the establishment of a trust fund for Lucas, significantly strained his resources. To meet these obligations, Richard was forced to liquidate some of his most valuable assets. Properties were sold, luxury cars were auctioned, and even his prized vacation home in the Hamptons was put on the market. The man who had once lived in excess now found himself having to make financial sacrifices he had never before considered. The irony of his situation was not lost on Richard. He had spent so much of his life chasing wealth and power, only to lose it because of a refusal to acknowledge a fundamental truth: that his actions had real and lasting consequences. It was a hard lesson, and one that came too late to preserve his status. There were nights when Richard found himself alone, staring at the walls of his penthouse, now stripped of much of its former grandeur, and contemplating the choices that led him there. The silence was a constant reminder of what he had lost, and not just in terms of money. However, within the darkness of his circumstances, there were glimmers of self-reflection. Richard began to see his situation not just as a downfall, but as an opportunity to reassess his values and priorities. For the first time in years, he found himself considering what truly mattered in life. It was not an easy process. The habits of a lifetime do not change overnight, but as he looked at the fragments of his once glorious life, he recognized that there was a part of himself that had been deeply flawed, so focused on external success that he had neglected the things that give life true meaning. Richard knew that seeking redemption would not be a simple task. It was one thing to face the financial and social repercussions of his actions, but another to confront the people he had hurt. His attempts to reach out to Lucas had so far been met with cautious responses. Their first meeting had been awkward, a mixture of hesitant conversation and long silences. It was clear that Lucas, though open to the idea of reconnecting, did not fully trust him. After all, this was the man who had abandoned him before he was even born. Richard could see the guarded look in Lucas's eyes, a look that spoke of years of unanswered questions and quiet disappointments. Elena, too, was understandably wary. While she had encouraged Lucas to give his father a chance, she did not extend the same opportunity so easily. Her relationship with Richard was marred by years of hurt, and forgiveness was not something she could offer lightly. Richard knew that he could not expect to undo the damage with a few gestures or kind words. It would take time, consistency, and genuine effort to rebuild the bridges he had burned. With this in mind, Richard began taking small but meaningful steps towards change. He attended counseling sessions to address the deep-seated behaviors that had led him to prioritize success over relationships. He also started volunteering at local organizations that supported single mothers and children, not as a publicity stunt, but as a way to understand the struggles Elena had faced. It was through these experiences that he began to see the world from a different perspective, one that valued compassion over competition. Meanwhile, Elena and Lucas were embracing their newfound stability. The legal victory had given them financial security, allowing Elena to pursue her dream of running a cafe. Haven of Hope was more than just a business. It was a place where the community gathered, where stories were shared, and where people found comfort in the warm atmosphere. Elena found fulfillment in the work, knowing that every cup of coffee and every pastry she served was a reminder of the strength it took to get to this point. For Lucas, the settlement had opened doors that were previously out of reach. He no longer had to worry about whether they could afford school supplies or extracurricular activities. He threw himself into his studies, inspired by his mother's resilience, and began to explore the possibility of a future in law, motivated by a desire to help others who faced injustices. The idea of becoming a lawyer like Samantha appealed to him, and he often found himself imagining what it would be like to stand in a courtroom, advocating for those who needed a voice. Despite their progress, the presence of Richard in their lives remained a complicated matter. While he had taken steps towards change, Elena remained cautious about letting him too close too soon. She could see that Lucas was still sorting through his emotions, trying to reconcile the image of the father he had imagined with the flawed man who was now seeking a place in his life. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience and understanding from all sides. In the next chapter, we will follow Elena and Lucas as they move forward, embracing new opportunities while navigating the challenges of rebuilding relationships. The story will also delve deeper into Richard's journey of redemption, exploring whether he can truly change and earn back the trust he lost. Will Richard find his way back into his son's life, or will the scars of the past prove too deep to heal? Don't miss the next part. Subscribe to our channel and join us for the unfolding drama. Comment below. True change comes from within. Stay with us as we continue this emotional and transformative story. After the dust settled from the courtroom battle, life began to move forward for Elena and Lucas. The sense of relief was palpable. They were no longer struggling to make ends meet, and the future seemed to hold more promise than ever before. With the financial settlement providing a cushion, Elena was able to step away from the exhausting double shifts at the diner and focus on building a new chapter for herself and her son. The first step was realizing her long-held dream of opening a cafe. Elena had always loved the idea of creating a space where people could gather, share stories, and find comfort. She poured her heart into transforming a small storefront into a haven of hope, a cozy cafe nestled in a quiet corner of town. The name was a reflection of her own journey finding hope even in the darkest times. With warm lighting, shelves lined with books, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, the cafe quickly became a popular spot for locals. Elena took pride in welcoming every customer with a friendly smile, offering not just a beverage, but a sense of belonging. Lucas, too, found himself adjusting to this new phase in life. The weight of financial worries had lifted, allowing him to explore his interests without the constant burden of what they could afford. He began to immerse himself in his studies with newfound enthusiasm, taking part in debate clubs and mock trials at school. Watching his mother transform her life inspired him to think about his future, and he started considering a career in law. Samantha Thompson, their attorney, had left a lasting impression on him, not just for her skill in the courtroom, but for the way she had fought for justice with passion and integrity. The idea of one day becoming a lawyer and helping others navigate difficult situations fueled his ambition. As Lucas pursued his academic goals, he found comfort in the supportive community that had rallied around him and his mother. Teachers, neighbors, and even customers at the cafe shared words of encouragement, offering advice and resources to help him along the way. Lucas began to realize that there were many good-hearted people who believed in him and wanted to see him succeed. This network of support was a stark contrast to the isolation he had felt before the trial, when it seemed like his family's struggles were theirs alone to bear. Meanwhile, Elena focused on the day-to-day operations of the cafe. She poured her creative energy into crafting a menu filled with unique pastries, homemade soups, and specialty drinks. Haven of Hope became more than just a business. It was a place where people came to share their joys and sorrows, where Elena often found herself listening to the stories of others who were also overcoming their own challenges. The cafe's name had truly taken on a life of its own, symbolizing a refuge for those who needed a little warmth in their day. One of the most touching aspects of running the cafe was seeing the way Lucas contributed. He often helped out after school, clearing tables or chatting with customers. There was a natural ease about him, a kindness that drew people in. Elena watched with pride as he interacted with customers, sensing that the experiences they had gone through had instilled in him a deep empathy. It was this quality that made her believe Lucas would indeed make a great lawyer one day, one who would fight for justice with the same dedication and compassion Samantha had shown them. However, even as they embraced their new opportunities, the past still lingered. The presence of Richard in their lives continued to be a complex and evolving situation. Since the trial, he had made several attempts to reconnect with Lucas, seeking to build a relationship where none had existed before. Richard was persistent but patient, understanding that earning back the trust he had lost would not happen overnight. Their meetings were cautious and infrequent at first, taking place in neutral locations like the local park or a coffee shop, not haven of hope. As Elena preferred to keep that space free from any tension, Lucas approached these interactions with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was curious to know more about his father, to understand why things had turned out the way they did. On the other hand, there was a part of him that remained guarded, still hurt by the years of abandonment. Richard seemed sincere in his efforts, sharing stories of his own upbringing and expressing regret for his past mistakes. He told Lucas that he was not proud of the decisions he had made, and that he was determined to be a better person, starting with being a better father. It was not lost on Lucas that his father's circumstances had drastically changed since the trial. The Richard Collins who had once been a powerful and influential businessman now appeared more humble, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him for so long. There was no longer the same air of superiority, but rather a man who had been humbled by life's harsh lessons. Despite the progress, Lucas maintained a healthy level of skepticism. He wasn't ready to forgive and forget, but he was willing to give his father a chance slowly, on his own terms. Elena, meanwhile, found it difficult to accept Richard's efforts at reconciliation. She had borne the brunt of his decisions, facing the challenges of single motherhood and enduring years of struggle. While she could see that he was trying to change, she also knew that the scars he had left were deep. Her primary concern was protecting Lucas, ensuring that any involvement Richard had in his life was positive and genuine. Elena kept her distance, maintaining a polite but firm boundary, and left it up to Lucas to decide how much or how little contact he wanted with his father. As Richard continued to reach out, he also took steps to rebuild his life in other ways. He stayed involved in volunteer work, which he found unexpectedly fulfilling. The time he spent working with community organizations, particularly those focused on supporting single-parent families, gave him a new perspective on the struggles people face. It was a stark contrast to the world he had known, where success was measured in profit margins and social status. Slowly, Richard began to see that the value of a person's life was not found in their accomplishments, but in the kindness they showed and the lives they touched. For Richard, the process of change was both humbling and transformative. He realized that earning back Lucas's trust was not just about apologizing or making amends. It was about consistently showing up and being present. There were setbacks, moments when his old habits and temper flared up, but he recognized these as part of his own journey toward becoming a better person. Each time, he reminded himself that this was not about redemption in the eyes of the public, but about being the father Lucas deserved. As the months passed, Richard's persistence began to make an impact. Lucas found himself gradually letting down his guard, noticing the small but meaningful gestures his father made. Richard attended his debate competitions, helped him with homework, and was even there to cheer him on during a school play. These actions, while seemingly small, began to chip away at the wall Lucas had built around his heart. In one particularly touching moment, Richard shared with Lucas a photograph he had kept all these years, a picture of Elena taken at the Collins mansion during the early days of their relationship. It was a candid shot, capturing her with a soft smile, and for a moment, Lucas saw his mother in a different light. "Your mom was special," Richard said quietly. "I didn't see it then, but I see it now. She raised you well, and for that, I'm grateful." It was the first time Richard had openly acknowledged Elena's role in Lucas's upbringing, and the sincerity in his voice struck a chord with Lucas. Elena, observing these changes from a distance, found herself slowly warming to the idea of Richard being a part of their lives. While she had not yet fully forgiven him, she appreciated the fact that he was making an effort for Lucas's sake. The wall she had built for her own protection began to lower, piece by piece, as she saw the positive effect Richard's involvement was having on their son. In the final chapter, we will explore whether Richard's journey towards redemption comes full circle and how Elena and Lucas navigate the evolving dynamics of their family. Will the wounds of the past heal completely, or will some scars remain? Find out how this powerful story concludes. Subscribe and stay tuned for the conclusion. And don't forget to comment below. Forgiveness is a gift we give to ourselves. Join us for the final chapter of this emotional journey. The road to redemption is rarely straightforward, and for Richard, the journey was filled with self-reflection, gradual progress, and inevitable setbacks. As he continued to reach out to Lucas and demonstrate his commitment to being a better father, he found himself grappling not only with his past decisions, but also with the deeper reasons behind them. He realized that seeking forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning from it, accepting responsibility, and showing genuine remorse. It was a process that required more than words. It demanded actions and a sustained effort to rebuild broken trust. Lucas, for his part, had started to see his father in a new light. While the scars from Richard's absence still lingered, there was a growing recognition that people could change, even if the transformation wasn't perfect. Lucas continued to engage with Richard cautiously, allowing him into his life one step at a time. It was through the small gestures, like attending his school events or even just having lunch together, that Lucas began to notice the subtle ways in which Richard was changing. There were no grand declarations, but rather a consistent presence that was slowly chipping away at the barriers Lucas had built. Alina, however, remained more guarded. She had spent years being the sole parent, bearing the weight of Richard's decisions, and navigating the difficulties of raising a child alone. While she saw that Richard was making an effort, she had not yet fully reconciled her own feelings toward him. Forgiveness, she knew, was not something that could be forced. It had to be earned, and even then, it would come on its own terms and timeline. Yet, she could not deny the positive impact Richard's involvement was having on Lucas. In an unexpected moment of reflection, Elena realized that she was witnessing something rare. A man who, despite his previous indifference and arrogance, was genuinely trying to change. It wasn't easy for her to let go of the resentment she felt, but slowly, she began to open herself up to the possibility of a different future, one where Richard could play a role, not as the man she had once cared for, but as a father to their son. The turning point came during a family counseling session, which Richard had suggested in hopes of addressing the lingering tensions. The idea of sitting in a room with Richard and discussing their past seemed daunting to Elena, but she agreed for Lucas's sake. The counselor, a soft-spoken woman with years of experience, guided the conversation carefully, allowing each of them to express their feelings without judgment. It was in this setting that Richard admitted something he had never openly acknowledged before. "I was afraid," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of how a child would change my life. Afraid of being a father, of being vulnerable. I thought that keeping my distance would protect me, but I see now that it only hurt the people I should have cared for most." The admission hung in the air, its sincerity cutting through the layers of defense that each of them had built over the years. For the first time, Elena saw not just the man who had abandoned them, but a flawed human being grappling with his own fears and shortcomings. It was a side of Richard she had never seen, a side that made him appear less like the confident businessman she had once worked for and more like an imperfect person struggling to find redemption. Lucas listened intently, his expression a mix of curiosity and compassion. He had heard his father say he was sorry before, but this was different. There was a vulnerability in Richard's voice that made it clear this wasn't just about trying to repair a relationship. It was about facing his own weaknesses and seeking to be better. The counseling sessions continued over the following weeks, allowing them to discuss the past openly, share their hopes for the future, and begin to heal old wounds. As the weeks turned into months, Richard's presence in Lucas's life became a new kind of normal. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension and doubt, but there was also a growing sense of understanding. Richard made an effort to support Lucas not just emotionally, but also practically. He contributed to Lucas's education, helped him prepare for debate competitions, and even began teaching him the basics of business, a topic that fascinated Lucas as he thought about future career possibilities. Alina watched these developments cautiously. She wasn't ready to embrace Richard with open arms, but she found herself softening as she observed the way Lucas responded to his father's efforts. She began to accept that people could indeed change, even if that change took years to manifest. While she had no interest in rekindling any sort of romantic relationship with Richard, she could see the value in allowing him to be a part of Lucas's life. It wasn't about forgiving and forgetting. It was about finding a way forward that was healthy for everyone involved. Richard, for his part, continued his volunteer work and counseling sessions, realizing that personal growth was an ongoing journey. He no longer viewed his past mistakes as something to be hidden or ignored, but as experiences that had shaped him. Each day, he aimed to be better than the day before, even if progress was incremental. The humility he had gained through the trial and its aftermath made him more receptive to others, and he began forming genuine friendships for the first time in years. Friendships that were based not on social status, but on shared values and mutual respect. As time passed, Richard reached a point where he wanted to do something meaningful for Elena, something that would acknowledge the years she had struggled alone. After much thought, he approached her with an offer. "I know I can never truly make up for what you went through," he said, "but I'd like to help expand Haven of Hope. Maybe we could open a second location or add some new features. I want to support you the way I should have from the beginning." Elena was taken aback by the offer. She had not expected such a gesture, and for a moment, she felt conflicted. Part of her wanted to reject the idea outright, to prove that she didn't need anything from Richard. But another part of her recognized the sincerity in his offer, not as a way to erase the past, but as a way to contribute to a future where they could coexist peacefully for Lucas's sake. After careful consideration, she agreed to let him invest in the cafe, with clear boundaries and terms. It was a tentative step towards cooperation, built not on rekindling lost feelings, but on creating something positive from the ashes of their shared history. The partnership was a success. The expansion brought more customers to Haven of Hope, and the cafe became a thriving part of the community, offering not only food and drinks, but also hosting events and workshops for families. The cafe's growth was a testament to Elena's resilience, and even Richard's involvement was seen as a sign that people could indeed change for the better. Lucas took pride in the new developments, seeing the cafe as a representation of their journey, a place where hope and second chances were more than just abstract concepts, but lived experiences. He continued to excel in school, driven by his ambition to become a lawyer and help others, as Samantha had helped his family. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when the old wounds would resurface, but they were no longer as painful. They had become reminders of how far they had come and how much they had grown. Elena, Lucas, and even Richard learned that while forgiveness might not erase the past, it could pave the way for a better future. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that touch the heart and encourage reflection. Share your thoughts below. Redemption is not about being perfect, but about choosing to grow. Let's continue sharing stories that remind us of the power of change, resilience, and the courage to move forward.